Hey, it's CrossFitTracking.com here to do a first hands-on touch base with the Polar Grit X, the newest from the line of sports watches from Polar. And we're going to look at it in all the same basic areas we normally do. We're going to evaluate the heart rate sensor. There's some changes, and we're going to get into a hands-on after this sort of face-to-face. Heart rate sensor, how does it handle a single workout evaluation? How does it handle singular workout recovery evaluation? And how does that compare to some of the other manufacturers out there? Long-term load tracking, how does it assess load? How does it calculate it? The overall wellness assessment, and that ties into sleep tracking. So the sleep tracking is going to use the same nightly recharge that Polar has used in their more recent updates with the Vantage series, as well as the introduction of the Ignite last year. And that ties into the overall wellness. We're going to look at the app, overall ease of use there, the weight, design, the feel, the straps, the screen quality, and that specifically within the Backlight as well. The watch functionality, how does it handle just on the day-to-day, just with notifications and different things like that. And I'm going to give some initial thoughts in a second. Battery life, how long does it actually last on a hold a charge versus the manufacturers? And the overall cost. The cost is $429. And just to get in some of the specifics, we'll get into the hands-on. I'll run a backlight test and just show you a couple of screenshots with what the backlight looks like in use. And what I'm going to do is over the next few weeks, we're going to have a midpoint review after a couple weeks of using it, specifically looking at how did the optical heart rate sensor hold up with the new light components. And then we're going to look at it at the end after 4 weeks to just seeing load tracking and how does it evaluate workouts and efforts, because all of that ties into evaluating our CrossFit training and our overall progress. So let's get into it. Okay, so this is the hands-on, just getting a first look at the overall watch. You can see the overall size has a much more significant, bezel edge to it. Obviously, the Vantage series had glass almost from screen to screen. This has a bezel where it's sort of the crystal behind it is inlaid. I do have a watch protector on there, or a screen protector on there, so if we notice any lag between the movements. You have the backlight here, and besides that, you have a backlight when you do a wrist raise. We're going to look at that in a light test. I do want to say at the outset that the backlight is the same for the wrist gesture from what was previously released on the Vantage V and the Vantage M. I've sent a note to Polar to see if there's any potential for changing the settings to where you could make the full backlight the wrist raise backlight. And I will say that the screen, looking at the screen, it's a transflective screen, but the quality or the clarity of the colors is better than the Vantage series. So the Vantage was more washed out, a little bit more dim. This has got better blacks and more crisp color to it, but the backlight is somewhat of an issue. The overall width of the watch is 47 millimeters, and the thickness of it is 13 millimeters. So, and you look at it compared to, I just have the Garmin 245 right now. So the 245 is coming in at 42 millimeters, and the thickness though of the 245 is 12.2, and the grit is supposedly 13. But if you look at it side by side, it is considerably thicker than the 13 millimeters it seems that they are quoting on the website. I don't obviously think that they're counting the heart rate tracking extension where it comes up in a bubble form. It feels very much like the size of the Phoenix 6, as well as the size of the Vantage V, as well as the size of the Apex Pro, and maybe similar to the Apex Vertex. I haven't tested that. The bands are 22 millimeter. You can see that the new heart rate sensor, instead of having green diodes across, it's now got a combination of yellow and red with one green in the middle. They are activating 10 lights now, whereas the Vantage V, Vantage M, and the Ignite were only activating 9. But this new color scheme is going to be interesting to see how it tracks in workouts. And it does seem like it is more raised in the overall thickness of the heart rate tracker itself. Again, the 22 millimeter quick release straps. The strap is a textured strap similar to the Polar Vantage V Titan model, which I liked a lot. It wore really well over time. It did not seem to soften up, not soften, but the ridges or the overall textured feel didn't wash out over time. It's got a good buckle on it. And overall, You know, the biggest thing I would say is that it seems thicker. When I first set it down on the counter, my son thought I still had the charging unit on it because it seems so thick when sitting down. And it does have a thickness to it that seems larger than, obviously, like I said, the 13 millimeters. So let's get into a backlight test. That's my biggest area of concern because I have a hard time reading the wrist gesture backlight that's on right now. So you can't see a very significant difference. We'll see if a light meter can even pick it up, and then I'll run a test and just sort of give you a side-by-side comparison. So come back for more, and we'll look at the rest. Okay, so this is just a somewhat darkened room wrist raise gesture, and you can see that the backlight is on the Garmin. The backlight is actually on the Polar. It's just incredibly dim. If we activate the backlight in full, then obviously it has more of a brilliance to it, and I'll test to see how it compares to other watches, and I'll give you sort of the breakdown. But in the basic settings, when you just do the wrist raise gesture, it is somewhat not as legible. So far in using it, I haven't been able to very easily read the information on the screen from a normal arm's length distance because the backlight is so dim. So we'll have to see how the light meter holds up. Okay, you can see from the video that it is much more dim with the wrist raise gesture and comparable with the regular backlight turned on. But after doing a lumen test or using just a standard power light meter, just a very basic one that does pick up basic readings relatively well, it shows that we have the same exact concerns we did with the Vantage series. So when you do a wrist raise gesture, so think about it from the amount of lumens a normal watch produces. The way I calculate it is how many lumens are being produced from the watch face itself with the backlight on, you know, just obviously seeing whatever you're seeing on the screen, and then how much does it produce from a full white background, which is what would be considered the brightest setting, and then I take the average of those two units. So standard watch face brightness as well as a full white background brightness and the average of those two. And then with the Vantage series and with the Grit, you have to take a combination of the wrist raise and the full watch and the full white background. Now on the wrist raise gesture, so think about it again, the Garmin had 13 lumens, the Apex Pro had 18 lumens, the Polar Ignite had 41, and I think the Fenix 6, I don't have those stats in front of me, I think it was like 43 on the average between the watch face and a full white background for overall brightness. So anywhere from 13 to 40, but let's just say in the 13 to 20 range for most of the transflective screens, not counting the Fenix 6 series. The average for the Grid X comes in at 12.5. So the overall average between the 245 as the lowest end of the scale is having 13.3 lumens and the Grid X coming in at 12.5. On the wrist raise gesture, I could not get the meter to pick up any light from the watch face wrist raise gesture. There it is on there now. When I put a white backdrop on there and then did a wrist raise gesture, I was able to pick up 2.3 lumens, so very, very low. When you do just the overall watch face with the full backlight on, it was coming in at 7.8 on the lumens, and then on a full white background with the watch face on, it was coming in at 27.5. So unfortunately, but when you look at it, and this is just the honest feedback, it looks like it's crisper, it's clearer, it's better screen technology or better screen sort of optimization than the Vantage series when it comes to the overall colors. So it definitely feels more legible. It definitely feels comparable to the Garmin 245. It's just we have to take into account some of those other things. Obviously, the wrist raise gesture is an unfortunate letdown, and just the data shows that it is not bright at all. Hopefully that'll be an update they do in time. So getting into the watch itself, we do have this new widget field, which is the weather data. It does have an interesting way of handling it. So if there's no weather data in recent hours, and I don't know the exact calculation, you would push this button and you would sync it to get up to date, and you can even tell it to go ahead and sync manually here rather than having to hold the button down. We're not going to do that now because it'll take a minute, but then you'll see the weather, and then you can go into it and see a weather schedule for the next few hours and a couple of days. So here's the basic FitSpark, so telling you just, obviously like what you want to do, sort of your overall recovery tied into a workout recommendation. It's suggesting that I do obviously some longer workouts, and it gives you some core and mobility workouts as well. One thing that's nice about FitSpark is when you've had a hard workout, it'll change. If you've had a bad night of sleep, like significantly bad, and your system is overall compromised, it'll recommend less exercise. So if you did a hard workout, it'll tell you to only do mobility for the rest of the day. If you did not get good sleep, it'll tell you similar things. The nightly recharge does a fantastic job of sleep evaluation. It's the same nightly recharge you've seen in other watches. It tells you the ANS, with the autonomic nervous system recharge, and that takes into account heart rate variability during sleep and components like that. So we can look at it just briefly. You can click through here, or you can move with the touch screen. So, the average heart rate, intervals, heart rate variability, and the breathing rate all comes into account with the nervous system regeneration, and then you can go into the sleep itself. It all shows it well in the app, which I'll show in a future video, just a full, more comprehensive. It tells you when I fell asleep, when I woke up, how much sleep, how continuous it was, what my REM sleep was, and my deep sleep, and it gives me my averages to compare that. Gives you a sleep score as well, which I really like. Next on the screens, you have your training session. You click into it, and you get your training log. One point about the overall speed of which the screens change, with the Vantage, there was more of a lag time. This feels faster than it did with the Vantage series and the Ignite series to change between screens, but it still has a lag time when you compare it to, say, like a Chorus or a Garmin. There's still just a lag time between it. You can go in, you can see all your basic stat components. When it comes to the workout itself, you can see your trim score, your heart rate zones, and everything looks really good here. Energy used, that's a new thing I'm going to have to look at, because it's now assessing how many carbs you effectively burned on top of the calories that you burned. So that's the workout log, as well as just a history training. You have your current heart rate, which doesn't give you much, just a couple of basic stats, your minimum, your maximum so far, and your cardio load. So the Ignite did not have the cardio load built in, but it's really great to be able to see it right on the watch itself. So you click into it, and it gives you a score. The way they calculate cardio load, and I'll talk more about this later, is your tolerance is your 28-day moving average of how much work you're putting in, and the strain is the overall assessment of the last 7 days of how much cardio strain you put on your body. So when the strain is less than the long-term average, then you are detraining. So if I'm straining my body more than my average, then I'm increasing my productivity. So you have to get it above 1 to be in the productive status, and you get above 2 and you get, overreaching status, overtraining. So it's, gives you a little tidbit about you should probably train more, and that's true because I busted my leg, so I'm not training for these next couple days. But it's great to have it built into the watch face. I missed it in testing the Ignite, just to be able to see what that exact score is. And touchscreen's working really well. It was a little bit more glitchy with the Vantage, but it's coming in fine now. I have my activity for the day, which is an assessment of overall movement, as well as calories, as well as heart rate, which I have found this to be the most useful screen when just looking at the watch at a glance throughout the day. To be able to see where you're at. It takes into account your activity based on your activity level settings that you told the Polar app, as well as the Polar watch. You can set what your level of workout expectations are, and it'll say, okay, are you staying on track with that? Then you have just the regular date and time. You can change this to an analog watch. This is obviously a digital watch, so you can change that. It's got all the same basic change settings as you would find in the Vantage or the Ignite. So you can change, basically you go in and the settings, you do your general settings that obviously sets up syncing, heart rate, and this is where you'd also set up a link to a heart rate chest strap. Flight mode, do not disturb, phone notifications on or off. Your physical settings, you just set literally your body and training background, activity goals, and then your watch settings, alarms. Everything seems to be the same on the watch settings as well when it comes to just what you can functionally do with it. Outside of that, you have within your, the menu options, you have a simple set. One thing that's good about Polar is it's a very simple platform design. I swear if they would just fix the backlight, that would be a big change in the overall feel towards the watch usage. So training modes, you can do breathing, you can connect to Strava Live. Here's the fueling. I'm going to study that a little bit, but not as in depth as an endurance component, because the workout will tell you how much fuel you burned, which you can assess both in caloric intake, but also in carbs burned. You have timers, which I use for intermittent fasting, so that's always helpful just to have built in. The fitness test. Oh, one thing about the Grid X, it does not include the orthostatic test, which ties into Polar's Recovery Pro, but I do not find that to be a big loss. I want to say that again. I do not find it to be a loss. This does not include orthostatic testing. An orthostatic test is a 3-minute test connected to a heart rate monitor, so the H9 or H10, and they have you lay down for half of it and they stand up for half of it. And it, through a calculation of heart rate variability, tells you if you are recovered or not recovered. But if you look at it in the app or if you look at it on the watch, it tracks it like an activity. So you find it in your activity logs and it'll say orthostatic test, and you go into the orthostatic test and it says you are not recovered or you are recovered. And so I did not find it to be useful. I went back relatively quickly after using it for a couple of weeks on the Vantage testing I did, which you can find in other reviews. And as always, if you like this review, please like it and subscribe for more things to come out. But the fitness test is where you get your VO2 max. You basically use the optical heart rate sensor on the back for the same similar 3-minute test where you lay down for half and you stand up for half. And it gives you an assessment of your VO2 max fitness level. It has been, for me, on point or on par with Garmin's testing as well as Cora's testing. So nothing to say about it there. But that's just an overall snapshot. I'm going to continue to test it. We've done it, I did an in-depth review of the Garmin Vantage V if you want to check that out, because it'll tie in a lot of the same components, because a lot of the same components are here. But we're going to evaluate the new heart rate sensor specifically. I'm really excited about that, as well as just the overall feel of the watch after a period of time. Well, side note before I forget, notifications tend to come in a jumbled state so far. I do tend to get a buzz if I get, if I get a phone call, I absolutely always get the phone call appearing on here. If I get a notification, it doesn't always appear on here. And then sometimes later, it'll appear in a jumbled setting. And all you do is you swipe up to be able to get access to your most recent notifications. And you can see that there. But it doesn't always, it sometimes comes in lumps. So it's not as always immediate and tracking as well. So this is the Polar Grit X initial hands-on review. I'm going to do that extensive review. Please, if you like, if you like the video, please like it. If you want to see the upcoming reviews, everything is based on what would be helpful for CrossFit training and CrossFit evaluation and your overall training plan. Please subscribe for future use.